Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to read to you the first short story in my prequel book, The Spare Who Became the Heir. Let's begin, shall we? Becoming a Returned One. Alex's point of view, winter 1543. Alex stomped on the ice, stuck out her tongue, and laughed at Michael. Worrywart, worrywart, Michael is a worrywart, Michael is a worry... There wasn't even enough time for her to hear the ice crack before the freezing river water stopped her heart. Panic took over as her heart lurched back to life, pounding like the water on the surrounding rocks. The Darren River flowed from the mountains, and by the time the water reached the camp, its velocity loosened the jagged rocks along the shore. Grab something, stop yourself, this is not happening. Not like this. Alex frantically grasped at the ice with her fingernails, but the river dragged her away from the open area and Michael. She flailed about before grabbing hold of a sharp piece of ice, but a second later she was tumbling like a leaf through the rapids. Her lungs burned. There was a light coming through the ice ahead, but she couldn't hold her breath anymore. No, please. Her body forced her to inhale. And as she did, the water froze her to the core, plunging her into darkness. The next thing she knew, a sharp pain radiated through her chest and she vomited water. When she opened her eyes, a head of blonde hair and a pair of bright blue eyes stared back at her. "That's my girl," the strange boy whispered. "You can't leave. You're going to be much too important to him." "Who?" Alex asked in a rough whisper. His face tunneled into blackness and he vanished. Michael was talking now. His voice sounded far away. His hands felt her chest, looking for injuries. Ian, the camp's leader, cursed and his footsteps pounded toward her. A familiar scent of pine and musk teased her nostrils as Stefan scooped her up and ran back to the camp. "Stefan? I'm sorry. I'm freezing." Her teeth chattered and every part of her little body hurt. She rubbed her arms vigorously, burrowing beneath the blankets. The wool scratched her bare chest and she realized she was wearing different pants. They were softer than her usual ones. "Where are my clothes?" "Flux, Ian, you let my 9-year-old sister run off without telling me?" Stefan was furious, his pale skin turning redder by the second. Alex slunk further down, hoping he wouldn't notice she'd awoken. "Since when do you not trust Michael to watch out for Alex?" Ian snapped. "You've trusted him with her since the first day she brought him home." Alex finally opened her eyes. She hated that they were fighting because of her. Stefan's messy red hair and tear-streaked cheeks made her stomach sink. For 5 years now, he'd been masquerading as her brother to protect her, and she'd never seen him this upset. Ian had tied back his long black hair and his brown eyes regarded Stefan with an unfamiliar ferocity. Stefan said, "She fell through the ice, Ian. Michael said she wasn't breathing. She was..." He swallowed hard and his lip quivered. "I was what? Was I dead? I can't remember." Stefan was 7 years older than Alex, but right now, he was a small, scared boy trapped in the body of a strong, brave 16-year-old. Suddenly, he whipped his head toward her. "Alex, you're awake?" Stefan raced to the bed and pulled a hand on her forehead. "How do you feel?" "Cold." Guilt settled deep in her chest, and even under 8 blankets, her body trembled as if she were standing outside in the January air. "How am I so cold?" "I told you, she needs body heat. Blankets won't cut it," Ian said. "Fine, can you fetch Michael?" Stefan asked. He pulled off his shirt and climbed under the blankets with Alex. The door banged shut as Ian left their hut. "You stink," Alex said as she tried to wriggle away from Stefan, but he was too strong and she was too weak and tired. "Sorry, Alex, you need to warm up fast and the blankets aren't doing it." Stefan wrapped his arms around her and pulled her into a bear hug. His chest was like fire against her back. She soon stopped trembling and her teeth chattered less. Minutes later, the hut door opened again. Michael threw his shirt on the floor and snuggled up to her front. Within a minute, Alex's teeth stopped chattering and she fell asleep, snuggled between the 2 boys she loved as brothers. Despite the mountain of blankets, Alex shivered in the frosty morning air. The rough wool felt like needles on her skin, but it was all they could afford. She never told Stefan how much it made her itch and chose instead to wear her thickest shirt to bed. Now, having slept without it, it was as if her skin was trying to crawl off her. She slipped out of the blankets and gripped herself. Her hut was empty, but her clothes lay on the small, dilapidated table. After pulling the thick shirt and Michael's outgrown tunic on, Alex felt more like herself. She breathed, pulling her damp braided brown hair out of her shirt. Something feels off. Alex threw her frayed winter cloak over her shoulders and shoved her feet into Thomas's old boots. When she stepped out of the hut, silence engulfed her. Snow had fallen while she slept, and more was coming down. Alex looked around and realized there were no footprints visible. The camp was deserted. The sky was so thick with clouds that she couldn't be sure what time of day it was. Alex pulled her cloak close as she reached the camp's central open area. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she moved away from the row of huts behind her. Someone had sealed them up tight and locked the stable too. We never lock the stable. Alex's eyes widened as she looked again. A familiar older boy had just appeared ahead and was watching her. There was a connection to him she didn't have with the other camp boys. There wasn't a single footprint anywhere near him. His golden hair glittered despite the lack of sunlight, and it sparked a memory from long ago. I know that blonde. Alex took a few steps towards him, but he held a ghostly pale hand before peering into the woods across the clearing. Closer now, Alex recognized him. He was the one who'd gotten her out of Warren after her grandfather had murdered her mother. Without him, she'd be dead. But you're dead. Prince Daniel of Dayton had died 5 years ago. Now seeing his face from the side, she realized she'd seen it hundreds of times out of the corner of her eye, but it always vanished when she turned to look. A low guttural growl resounded through the camp. Turning to the opening between the stables and the fire pit, Alex spotted the glowing eyes of a predator crouching behind her. She swallowed hard. Alex? Stefan's voice carried across the clearing from the armory. Afraid to move, Alex turned her head enough to spot Stefan, Ian, and Michael at different huts and buildings. They had their doors open and were beckoning her to come. It's too far away. I'll never make it. Daniel moved soundlessly across the snow and positioned himself between her and the beast. The wolf's glowing blue eyes followed him. How can it see him? Another growl rumbled out of the wolf, making Alex step back. Fear flooded her veins, and she bit her bottom lip so hard she tasted blood. Daniel inched toward the wolf. In the distance, Stefan's mouth was moving, but Alex's pounding heart drowned out every sound around her. Ian leaped from his hut and began shouting, but the wolf's eyes stayed fixed on Alex. Time slowed down for Alex as the wolf crouched again. From the corner of her eye, she could see Stefan and Ian screaming at the wolf, even if she couldn't hear them. Oliver blocked Michael from running toward the standoff. Daniel remained in the beast's path, and Alex's pulse quickened each second that passed, waiting, worrying, wondering what would happen next. Then heat erupted from Alex's core. A cacophony of noise from her friends suddenly exploded. Her ragged breathing resounded in her ears, and her skin burned as she threw her arms up. Then she heard a yelp as a massive wind tore through the camp, making Alex turn her head and protect her eyes. When she turned back to the beast, her arms glowed. Lowering them, she curled her hands into fists, awestruck. They're gold. She opened her hands, wondering if it would end the glowing, but it didn't. She turned her gaze back to Daniel, who winked at her. The wolf was struggling to get up. Alex's lungs were on fire. She gasped for air. Breathe. How am I glowing? The wolf had righted itself and was growling again. Ian's powerful arms grabbed her biceps, and he dragged her backward through the snow toward his hut. Alex watched the wolf, but Ian jumped in front of her. Stay behind me. Alex peeked around Ian. The wolf was limping, its left paw raised. I'm scared. I know. When I say go, run to Stefan. Don't think. Just get over there. Do you hear me? Yes, Alex said. Her voice trembled, her lip quivered, and her hands were still glowing gold. Ahead of her, Stefan smiled weakly at her and held out his arms, but he kept a steady eye on the wolf. Run! Ian shouted so suddenly that Alex tripped, catching herself at the last second. Then she ran as hard as she could toward Stefan. As she got closer, his eyes widened in terror. Alex's breath burst from her lungs as the wolf slammed her into the ground, snarling and snapping its jaws above her. The same heat flooded her as she thrust her hands out and screamed. A yelp and several loud thumps echoed in Alex's head. Get up! Get up! She was glowing gold all over now. Somehow the wind raging through the camp was coming from her. Wind tossed the wolf about like a leaf in a fall storm, and as the tempest roared, she soon saw Ian on the ground nearby while Stefan strained against the wind, pinning him to the armory. Michael fought to get to her. Alex stumbled to her feet and stared the wolf down. Its eyes seemed almost human. Then it suddenly turned and ran back into the bush. A few minutes later, a firm hand gripped her shoulder. Why are you glowing? Ian asked as the wind died. I don't know. How are you glowing? Oliver asked as he arrived with Michael. I don't know, Alex repeated. Michael took hold of her glowing hands. Her skin was hot, and as she looked up at him, her glow vanished. He smiled at her. Are you okay? He asked. Alex nodded as he hugged her. What was that? Graham asked, arriving with Stefan. How are you Stefan's sister, but also a sorceress? I can't tell you. Stefan, what do we say? Alex swallowed. They deserved the truth, but she didn't even understand what was going on. How could she explain it to them? Ian patted her shoulder and looked at Stefan. Alex came from an affair, didn't she? Ian's tone was calm, conversational even, without a hint of question, as though he were simply commenting on the weather. "A what?" Alex asked as everyone turned to Ian. "You're from Dayton. Your mother had an affair with the sorcerer Murloc, didn't she?" Again, it didn't sound like a question. "That's why she's dead." Stefan's eyes darkened as he regarded her briefly before turning to Ian. He frowned and breathed deeply. "You don't have to do this." "Yes. My father discovered Alex wasn't his and killed our mother in a rage. I took her away before he could hurt her. That's how we ended up here." "Ian, they can't stay," Graham said. "She's dangerous." "No, she isn't. We all have pasts we're trying to escape," Michael said. "And she's so little," another said. The rest of the camp now surrounded them. Ian gazed down at Alex, crossing his arms. His hard stare always made her feel extra small, despite her already being the smallest in the camp. "Stand up to him. He won't throw both of us out." After a few minutes, Ian turned to the others. "She has a magical necklace that makes her look like a boy. And you're surprised to learn there's magic inside her too? No one knows where she is, so we will continue to keep her hidden. She's one of us for as long as she wants to be." Alex sighed when Ian squeezed her shoulder. Stefan gripped her cheeks and kissed the top of her head. "I suspect you have questions." "Many," Alex said. "So I am a sorceress like my mother." "You two clucking hens can stay here, but I'm going to find that wolf," Graham said. "I don't know what you did to it, but I think I can track it and sell the hide." "Take Oliver with you," Ian ordered. "No one goes out alone with that thing around." Michael exchanged a look with Stefan. "I've got her," Stefan said. "You help Ian check the camp." Michael hugged Alex and hurried off after Ian. Stefan's hand slipped around Alex's shoulder and pulled her toward their hut. Once inside, he closed the door and turned to Alex. "Could she do that?" Alex asked before Stefan could even open his mouth. The notion glued her to the spot right inside the doorway. Stefan ruffled his hair and then hers before sitting on his bed. He motioned for her to sit on her bed. Instead, Alex kicked off her boots and sat beside him, curling her legs beneath her as she looked up at him. Stefan swallowed hard. "Your mother was the Princess of Warren and had magical abilities, as you know. But I never told you how powerful she was, or that sorcerer's power don't manifest until you're older. At least that's what I was told." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Honestly, no one knew if you'd get powers. There isn't a lot of information on half-sorcerers. I didn't want you to have to worry about this until you had to." Alex looked down and picked at the hem of her shirt. "Is that why he killed her?" "We don't know how many people know what he did. We don't know how many people know he did it, and I don't know why your grandfather murdered your mother. I just know I swore I'd protect you until my dying breath, and yesterday I failed at that job," Stefan said as he rubbed his legs with his palms. Alex grabbed his hand and squeezed it. "I'm sorry. I'll try to stay out of trouble. I know keeping us fed is hard enough." Deep laughter filled the hut as Stefan looked at her. "You're a 9-year-old girl. You're going to get into trouble. I just need to get better at predicting what you'll get into." "Are you okay with the story they came up with?" "I'm not thrilled at the idea of my father being seen as a merciless killer. But it fits, so we're stuck with it." "What if this is just the start?" "What do you mean?" Stefan asked. "Could I get more powers?" "Don't worry about that. We can't change what's coming, and besides, Murloc isn't very strong. I doubt you'll get many more powers." Stefan chuckled, pulling Alex into a tight hug. "And even if you do, you'll never scare me away, you little imp." So if you want to hear the other 5 stories, go to my website at alicehanoff.com and download your free ebook of The Spare Who Became the Heir. Or if you're like me and you need the paper, you can find it on Amazon. Have a nice day and happy reading!